Tonight, we are going to talk about genetics, and we're going to talk about health, because increasingly science is showing us that they're basically one and the same thing. So when I was a kid and I was growing up, and I would say a comment to my mom about the color of hair or some aspect of my personality or myself, she'd say, well, it's in your genes, honey. And she's right, it's in your genes. And how many of you are aware of the Human Genome Project? You guys ever heard of that before? Well, it was this project that happened in the late 90s where they were looking at mapping all the genes that humans have. And they were just so excited to know that we could we could map the entire human genetic code, and they were looking at it like it would stop cancer, it would be the key to unlocking how to fix people's health problems. And then they realized, after they figured out all the genes, they mapped them all, but it didn't really people with the cancer gene never got cancer, and people without the cancer gene got cancer, and they started scratching their head and they go, well, how can that happen? And so what I'm going to try to communicate to you tonight is that what's really most important about your body and about your health is not what your genes are, it's how your genes get turned on and off. So your genes, think of your genes like a big phone book, and your body has the ability to dial different numbers, to make different calls, to make different things happen. But you're never going to have a situation where every number in the phone book is going to get called all at once, right? That wouldn't make sense. And so your body has a way to kind of like put a piece of tape over certain numbers so that you don't see them when you read the book. That's what your body does with nutrition. So the right vitamins, especially, as we'll see, B vitamins, allow the body to turn on and off genes so that it can control what the genes make. And this is called above the gene. It means epigene, which is, some Greek version of above, epigene. It means above the gene. And that's what I'm going to share with you tonight. This has been about 4 years of work putting this information together, making sense of it. But what I want to impart to you is that the choices we make and what we put in our body has a huge impact on our health, and it will actually turn your genes on and off based on those choices. So we're not victims of anything more than we're actually in control of our destiny more than we realize that we are. So some of these slides I've shown before, but 33% of the world is overweight. There's a genetic cause to that we're going to look at. When our belly shrinks or our belly grows, our brain gets smaller. There's an inverse relationship. So the more weight we carry around our midsection, it is related to actually a decrease in the volume of our brain, because the same problems in the body that cause fat to go into the midsection stresses out the brain and causes the brain to change size. So it's important for us to not, we're not all supposed to be skinny, but we need to be mindful of our body composition because it has effects on our genes, and I'll be going over that. This is another slide that I recently put together, and it basically shows that 30 years ago, Alzheimer's disease was almost non-existent in our society. There was almost no Alzheimer's disease at all. And what happened 30 years ago is we went to a low-fat diet campaign. Eat your Cheerios, eat your Wheaties, don't eat saturated fat, red meat is the devil, and all that stuff about low fat. And that campaign was very successful at accomplishing the destruction of our brain as a collective group of people. It hurts our brain to not have enough cholesterol. You need fat, your brain's made of fat, your hormones are made of fat, your skin's made of fat, your eyes are made of fat. Your glands, your endocrine system, it has a very high concentration of fat. So this is the environment that we are all living in, and there's still a lot of that thinking out there. Now, this is a slide I just put together. Basically, it was a study in mice. But if the mother mice was fed high fructose diet, a processed American diet, it actually changed the DNA of their kids. And what happens is when a mother doesn't take care of herself, it changes the genetic code through these markers I was talking about. So we go back to the phone book where you're looking at the pieces of tape that block certain names you don't want to call. You don't want to call the, you know, the really creepy guys down the street. You don't want to call the number the wrong number, okay? But when you change your diet to something that's not healthy and inflammatory, those pieces of tape in the phone book get moved around. And so now numbers that you don't want to call are showing up, and other ones that you really do want to call don't. In other words, your genes change. The ones you don't want to turn on, and the ones that you do want to make more of, they get shut down. So take care of yourself, because as you're going to see tonight, we're all genetic engineers, whether we know it or not, based off how we make choices. And they're looking in the genes of the dopamine pathway, the reward behavior. So, you know, the eating sugary foods, seeking pleasure, that kind of thing. The reason we get addicted to processed foods has a lot to do with how it affects our chemistry in our brain. And so that's what this study showed. Feed a mouse high fructose diet, high fat, and the offspring are more likely to be overweight too. This is what people are bringing home from grocery stores across the country. Not in stores like this, thank goodness. But this food is being consumed in large amounts, and there's really hardly anything in that picture that will spoil if it were left out. Probably less than 5% of everything on that table. So this is a big problem. This is what a study in France proved happens to mice who are fed GMO corn. So we're like the only country in the world really on this GMO bandwagon. Even China makes sure that we don't import. They're not even importing our wheat anymore. I read a report that the wheat crop and the export has dropped 85% because China refuses to buy genetically altered wheat. I think caution is a good stance in that argument. So these are tumors of the breast, liver, and kidney damage. So that's what GMO corn does to mice. And really, when we talk about DNA, we need to talk about what hurts our DNA. Well, toxins definitely hurt our DNA. And the active ingredient in Roundup, there's a movie I have on this that is so gross I don't even think I'm going to show it, but you can look it up. It was done by a Brazilian scientist. And I mean, we're talking about very, very severe birth defects in humans. And they're basically looking at what this study says, and this is published in 2010. It affects the cells of the embryo, and it damages the mitochondria. It causes cell death at doses far below those used in agriculture, meaning you don't have to be on the field when the plane flies over. You can just live near it, or even eat the food. You know, GMO corn, GMO wheat, GMO soy is designed to be resistant to glyphosate, which is what Roundup is. It's really strange chemistry, and you can think of the food that's grown on that field as more of a glyphosate delivery system than a food delivery system. It's putting in a poison into your body from the Roundup more than it's giving you nutrition. So that's the whole idea behind GMO is that chemical companies can spray fertilizer on crops and doesn't kill, or can spray pesticides on crops and doesn't kill the crops. I don't know if you've ever handled Roundup or sprayed it on anything. Hopefully, you know, you don't use it very much or you get rid of it, but it's not very nice to living things, you know? So if they can make a plant that's resistant to it, that's pretty creepy.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
If somebody is impacted by the Roundup, can they put that on to their own children also, or is it?
That's what. Yes. Yes, a young woman is born on a farm, and the crop duster flies over its head, and that young woman is able to have a kid and pass it on to her family, to pass on her DNA. That DNA damage will get passed on. You'll see. This is I've got a couple videos that Nova put together. So you know that's the negative side of the argument. The good side of the argument is that even the United Nations, and this was published just a couple months ago, basically says that the key to food security on planet Earth is to go organic. They're basically saying that monocrops and, you know, the way we're doing agriculture right now, and big agriculture, is a very big negative. And so what they're saying is you can increase the soil fertility by replacing synthetic fertilizers with organic. I'm sorry. Yeah. It's hard to be small. It's hard to be small, yeah. So even the United Nations is saying we should be going organic. So I don't know any more mainstream of a body than a collaborative organization like this. Organic agriculture is an ideal solution. That's what they published. If you go to Europe, they don't sell clothes in XL, XXL, or XXL. It's not in the rack, it's not in the store. People aren't that size. They don't eat, all they eat is organic. The methyl cycle determines everything about us as individuals. The cells in your eyes, the cells in your toes, the cells in your teeth are all the same genetically, but how do they turn into such different cells? And your body does that by using nutrition, which is what a methyl group is. So does anybody remember chemistry from like high school? You've heard of propane before? Have you heard of butane? So these are chemical names that tell you how many carbon are in the molecule. Methane is 1 carbon with 4 hydrogens. A methyl group is 1 carbon with 3 hydrogens. So in your mind's eye, that's what we're talking about. Methyl groups is 1 piece of carbon with hydrogen, but it's like this molecule your body uses to control genetics. So it sticks those little methyl groups all over your genes to tell which gene to be quiet and which to turn on. That's pretty cool. You know, when you look at how many genes a fruit fly has, it's like 19,000, and a human being has like 22,000. There's not that much difference. But there's a lot of difference in how those genes work. So the number of genes isn't as important as how they turn on. And this is a picture of the cycle that we look at in our office. And you don't need to know this cycle, you just need to know that that's going on in our cells. And there's a lot of areas where that can get slowed down and people can have depression, heart disease, cancer, and you can see a lot of changes at birth with babies based off that problem too, which is why I got interested in this in the first place. Because being a chiropractor, we're always looking at people from the outside. We notice things that are out of alignment. We see symmetry issues. And when I was in chiropractic school, we did a lot of studies of x-rays, and there were certain things on the x-ray that they called normal variants. And that's science speak for saying something's common enough. We just assume that it's just a variable of what normal is. But it's really not. It's just something. So what I'm really saying is there's optimum normal that we should have a certain number of bones in our spine. They should be a certain shape, and that's what normal is. And then some of us are a little bit off of normal, and some of us are way off. It's a spectrum. And one of the most common ones is spina bifida, and most of us have heard of that. Anybody here have anybody in their family or themselves have an issue? Know that they have ever had spina bifida before? Okay. What that means is that, and I'll show you, that's a problem with genetics in the mom when the baby was growing. That's a nutritional deficiency at the time of conception through gestation. That's why they've...
What about the dad?
Well, the dad plays a role, but a lot of it is in the mom. I mean, men don't get off the hook, don't get me wrong. But as far as the actual growth of the baby, I mean, that's all happening in the mom's body's delivering all the nutrients. So that's just a heavier load of responsibility. But I love this picture. The problem really is staring you in the face when you know what to look for with these genetic issues, okay? When I say genetic issues, what I'm saying is people who need to take the right amount of nutrients to optimize their health, okay? They're at a higher risk of depression, heart disease, cancer. They've got a lot of that in their family. So one of the things we look for is spina bifida. So the word methylation, we talked about that. That's the 1 carbon atom. And so when you look it up in the research, the term we use to talk about it is methylation. It's weird. It's like, you know, it's a word that just describes this whole universe of stuff we're talking about. But when someone has a problem with methylation, it means they have a problem moving those carbon atoms around. Okay? That's all it means. Now it can show up a lot of different ways. We're looking at how it shows up on the outside. Spina bifida, you can see scoliosis is related to it. Down syndrome, definitely related to it, okay? They know that, as we'll see, if you change a mother's nutritional status, make her healthier, the risk of her giving birth to a Down syndrome baby goes down. Did you know that?
So common with aging.
Well, what happens when we age? We lose our nutritional status. That's all aging is a breaking of DNA and a loss of nutrients at a faster rate. Remember the kid at the swimming pool with a dent in their chest? Anybody remember that person? Yes. So having a dent in your chest is an outward sign that when that baby was forming, there wasn't enough vitamins in that system for those cells to divide correctly fast enough. So when the baby's growing inside the mom, there's a lot of things that are happening, especially in the very first few days, first like 20, 25 days. The first thing that forms is your spinal cord, but basically the skull and spine and spinal cord and brain all form really fast. And it goes from like a plate, like a pancake, and it turns into a tube. That's what they call the neural tube. So when they say neural tube defect, they're talking about an error when this was going on. But because cells have to divide so fast, if there's not enough nutrition in the mom's body and in the environment where the baby's growing, the neural tube doesn't grow quick enough, and then it's left halfway open. That's what spina bifida means. Does that make sense? It didn't close all the way, and then it's like, oh, time's up. Got to move on to the next step in the process because we don't have 11 months, we have 9. We got to move on. And a cleft palate is spina bifida of the face. That's all it is. It's in the middle. It didn't shut all the way. Fetal alcohol syndrome. There's people who give birth to children who often have the same facial characteristics of of children born to alcoholics. Does that make sense? So when someone's an alcoholic, when a woman is, one of the things alcohol does is it makes it really hard for you to absorb B9. That's what alcohol does. So then you have a B9 deficiency, then you're going to have a change in the shape of the baby. And that's why they call it fetal alcohol syndrome, because there's a change in where the ears sit and where the eyes sit. Because as the baby's forming, the cells can't move quick enough to get to where they normally should be. Okay? And that's why this is really fascinating, because you can kind of work backwards and figure out what was going on. People born with one kidney, again, the kidney cells just didn't grow fast enough to break apart, and they had to mature in that state. So these are things we look for. Autism's related, as we'll see. Children born with a hole in their heart. I remember when I was growing up on the street down the road, there was a kid who, I didn't know at the time, but he had Down syndrome, and I always knew him as, Matthew, the boy who was born with a hole in his heart, because that's what I was told, and that stuck with me. And what that means is that when Matthew was growing inside of his mom, there wasn't enough vitamins and minerals present for that heart to fully develop fast enough. So it was left in an immature state when he was born. It's like being full term but premature at the same time. Does that make sense? All these syndromes where someone has an extra chromosome is all caused by this same problem. It's fixed with nutrition.
What's Turner syndrome?
Turner syndrome is when a female has, I believe it's an extra Y chromosome. It's like XXY. I'll have to double check. I don't have all my syndromes, but it's a trisomy. It means she has 3 chromosomes instead of 2. She has 3 copies of something instead of 2.
So is her face different?
Yeah.
Whole body?
Whole body. Sexual development has changed. Physical size. The whole body's affected. Anybody with tongue tie, they can't stick their tongue out. That's a little bit of a inability of the tongue to form correctly. And then I have patients who were born with their intestines on the outside of their body. Again, that's just a spina bifida in the front. It didn't shut. The cells that turned into that were stuck on the outside, and they had to get put back in. Couldn't tell now. Beautiful 20-year-old woman, you can't tell, but that's how she was born. So what's interesting about this is vitamins control how you look. They control how babies grow. If we don't give enough vitamins to ourselves, then our genetic code breaks down. And we are born with less optimum health. And if we happen to be born that way, we can still use nutrition to improve our health no matter what. But what's really interesting about this piece of data from the science, it says basically anything that's growing, if you don't have enough folate, B9 can change the shape of it. So if you have something that didn't grow the right shape or size, you're dealing with a problem with that right there. Now this was an interesting study on autism, and they took pictures of children with autism and they measured the different characteristics of their face. And then they were able to prove that children with autism have different shapes to their face.
Sleepy eyes.
They have a wider mouth. They have a flattened nasal bridge. They have a wider aspects to other facial features.
Nasal flare.
Yeah, so there is a relationship between what the face looks like and how the brain is working, because the brain and the face develop at the exact same time. So, you know, our eyes are parts of our brain that are pushed on the front of our face. Your tongue is an extension of your brain. I mean, really, this whole part that makes us who we are and gives us our individuality is really an extension of our brain. So we know that autism is a brain problem, and it changes the shape of the face. So we look then at, you know, what's causing birth defects in our society. What's causing loss of pregnancy, and the number one cause is birth defects. Well, birth defects are caused by not enough B vitamins and methyl groups, like I've just showed you. So spina bifida can be so bad that the baby doesn't survive. That's true. And some of those things we talked about, cleft palate, if a baby doesn't get that surgically fixed, that baby will starve to death because it can't suckle. So there's actually, you know, charities that go around and fix that, and that's a pretty powerful and important thing. But this genetic component to us is real important because it's affecting the survival of our children. This is a syndrome that is, you know, shown here. Sometimes babies are born really small and they have an extra digit, or they have a malformed ear, or their hand is not the right size. These are all examples of a baby growing in an environment where the genes didn't get enough nutrition and they changed. Okay? Basically what it's saying is, in growing tissue, if you have enough methyl groups, then you allow the DNA to replicate over and over again in perfect the way it should. If you don't have enough vitamins in your body, or when you're growing a baby, or when you're living, your DNA doesn't always, when it copies itself, it makes more mistakes. And this is basically saying that, to answer the question of does it come from mom or dad, this is in Down syndrome, but they say basically that 93% of the time it comes from the mom, and it happens right before fertilization. So this is happening like right when the baby, so it can happen right before fertilization, or it can happen soon after. The earlier it happens, the worse the problem. So if you're making copies of something and you mess up the first one, well, every copy's messed up. If you're making copies of it and you mess up the 10th one, well, then you're better off that way. So, you know, miscarriage it's a painful experience for families. And this gene right here, MTHFR, that's the most famous gene. That's the gene that's gotten all the attention. And that's the one that's related. It increases the odds of having a miscarriage by 250%. And what that means is this. MTHFR means that if you take a lot of folic acid, you can't use it. So folic acid is synthetic. It didn't exist on planet Earth before the 1900s. The methyl group B9, folate, comes from foliage. It's always been here. That's why they called it folate, because it's in green leafy stuff that we as a group of people don't eat enough of, right? So the key to remember when we go over all this stuff is that I'm showing you the problem, but the solution is always implied, that you just give folate, you give the right kind of vitamin in the right amount, and you totally bypass that issue. Because this gene, MTHFR, it's a problem. I have a patient who was given birth control when she was 31, and she had a stroke about 3 weeks later, and it paralyzed her upper body. And she's in her 60s, but we tested her, and she has this gene in her body, and she has 2 copies. See, each time we talk about genes, you get 1 copy from mom and 1 copy from dad on most genes. Some of them are just, if you're a guy, you only get 1 copy because only women have it. It only comes on the X chromosome. But she got 2 copies of that gene right there, 677, MTHFR, and that's why when she took in the estrogen from birth control, it built up in her system so much that it caused a blood clot, boom. And so this is what explains why certain people are getting sick for doing the same thing that the next door neighbor did and didn't even seem to faze them. So this is when you're trying to answer why, this is the next place to be looking, okay? Autistics. Children, and children on the autistic spectrum, 98% of them have this problem. That's pretty close to 100. 98% is darn near close to 100%. So that means that 98 out of every 100 child who has a diagnosis of autism has at least 1 problem with the MTHFR gene.
What's that have to do with vaccination?
We'll get to that. We will get to that.
Next session?
No, we'll get to that here coming down the road. Good question, though. The question was, what does that have to do with vaccinations? And we'll talk about that. Well, MTHFR, not being able to have enough B vitamins where you need it means you can't detox very well. It means you're going to get sick when other people are just fine. But there has to be a reason why this is happening. So it also increases the risk of Down syndrome. So women and men who carry this gene have a higher risk of giving birth to kids who have some kind of developmental problem.
Do you mean that the long crease across the hand means they're at higher risk, or is that the result of?
That's the result of. That's the physical expression of the genetic change. And that's the key to this idea, is that you can see it with your eyes once you know what you're looking for. So women and men who have this gene, they're in we all have it here. I guarantee you, we test everybody in this room, and at least half of you will have it. You're more susceptible to not having enough nutrition where you need it, and you're more susceptible to problems like that in your lineage. It also increases congenital heart defects. So again, this gene is slowing down how fast the body can make B vitamins and get them into a way that the body can use them. So let me go back and talk real quick about folic acid. It's a lot like folic acid in the rat study they talked about. They gave those rats on the TV screen folic acid. Well, rats don't have that problem that we have. They can just turn the folic acid into folate real easy. It's just a simple conversion. We can't do that very fast, and we have roadblocks to that process. So people who take a lot of folic acid may actually have a deficiency of B9, the active form of B9. Does that make sense? You can have the synthetic form of B9 high, but have almost no B9 that your body can actually use.
Is it because the folic acid makes the body think it doesn't need it, so the body doesn't produce it?
No, the body doesn't produce it at all. It has to come from our diet. It just has to be converted into a form the body can use. And it's like there's a roadblock, there's a huge traffic jam on the interstate, and you can't go forward. So you just get a little trickle. But if you get the right vitamin in, it's like airmail dropping it wherever you want it. So it bypasses the traffic jam. When you don't have a traffic jam, you experience health, if that makes sense. So this was an interesting study. They took a cell, and they just said, well, okay, we have this white blood cell here. Let's just take folic acid away from it and see what happens. What they found was when that cell divided, it turned into Down syndrome or some kind of genetic disorder. So if you take a cell from your body, you put it in a petri dish, and you take away the vitamins, and then the cell divides, it divides incorrectly. So they were saying that chromosome 21, that means Down syndrome. So they took a cell from someone's immune system, looked at it under a microscope, took all the B vitamins away, and then the cell divided and it divided incorrectly. The implication being you need these B vitamins in your body to repair yourself and grow. You know, autism now is 1 in 68 in 2010, and that's from the CDC. So it's probably, you know, look at the trend, 1 in 50, 1 in 125, 1 in 110, 1 in 68. I've seen some data that says it's 1 in 50 now. So whatever we're doing isn't working. As a collective group, we're not, you know, whatever strategy we're using isn't getting after the root cause. One reason why the vaccine issue is so is such a hot topic, controversial. Well, when mercury is given to the human body, it reduces an enzyme that detoxifies. So you put mercury in your body, you're going to not have the ability to detoxify. But that's exactly what you need to do because you just got mercury in your body. Does that make sense? So mercury shuts off the body's self-defense against mercury. And if you happen to have other genetic and nutritional issues, you're just going to get really toxic from that mercury, and that could cause that could lead to something like autism occurring in someone's body. So people with the genetic issue we're talking about, not being able to convert B vitamins very well, they're the bad detoxifiers. They're the people who they smell perfume and they get a headache for like a day. They can't be around people with, you know, smells on them. They have chemical sensitivities. These are also these are what these genes cause us to do. But this is really interesting. It's from a study from 2011. If you gave women vitamins and the right kind before they got pregnant, it would reduce the risk of autism. So I'm going to suggest the reason we're 1 in 68 and the reason autism isn't being treated is because women aren't healthy when they get pregnant. And they're not getting the right kind of vitamins. Possibly.
Prenatal vitamins aren't sufficient enough?
Well, it needs to be the right kind. A lot of prenatal vitamins have folic acid in there. So we need to, there's a kind of a movement afoot to replace folic acid with the right kind of B vitamin. So it gets confusing, you know. It's confusing. And
I have a grandson who's autistic.
So, you know, and I don't know what that's like. So I'm not trying to make light of, you know.
No, he's actually pretty sharp most times.
Sure.
Not all the time. And then our other son, Dan, he's got an unusually long tongue. Now, I don't know if that's why Dan can't talk. But he's very sharp other than that.
You know, there's a lot of evidence to say that children with autism actually are really gifted.
Yeah, he's done some things that kind of made me go, wow.
You know, but they're also vulnerable to the environmental toxin issue that occurs around them, and so that hurts. It's sort of like if you compare. So imagine that they didn't repair the interstate for like 10 years and all these potholes and garbage on the interstate. An old Ford truck is just going to bounce along and fine, but a Ferrari is going to get stuck and get all messed up. So are you born with a Ferrari or you're born a Ford truck? You know, if you're born a Ferrari, you're going to you got to be tuned up and you got to be taken care of differently. So taking care of women and getting them the right nutrition for their body will help all future generations benefit from, and we would see a reduction in autism, not an increase.
I may be jumping the gun, but can we fix the kids now?
Yeah. Well, I mean, everybody can improve, right? And these vitamins and all this information we're talking about right now applies to people alive today, absolutely. But it starts before we're born, and now we're kind of moving into today. So we're looking at young women, right? Young women they're having their period at like 9 years old. That's totally abnormal, completely abnormal, actually. Well, it's the estrogens and cheese and food and the, you know, in their environment and their cream and the hair products they're using. Those are full of estrogens too. And what they found was when a young girl with scoliosis was compared to a girl without scoliosis, okay? Straight spine, scoliosis. The girl with scoliosis had her period about 4 months earlier. And what that means is she has more estrogen in her body sooner, and estrogen puts pressure on her vitamins. Because remember, like I told you the story of a woman who got birth control and had a stroke? These B vitamins that we're not making enough of and not getting enough of in our diet, when you get into contact with estrogen, your body has to spend its account. So think of your vitamin status inside your body like a checking account. Every time you eat something good that nourishes you, you put a deposit into that account and your levels build up. But when you come into contact with something toxic, like an estrogen in the environment, you have to write a check and draw down that account. So women who are exposed to more estrogens without enough vitamins are more likely to have scoliosis. The average age of a woman having her period, look at Norway, Finland, Sweden, and the United States. In the 1850s, in France, it was about 16 years old was the average age when a woman had her first cycle. You're considered late today if you don't have it till you're 16. That's probably normal, human physiology. And you can see the downward trend. And there's always the argument, well, we're living longer today and we're healthier now than we ever have been. You know, we're not really living longer, because when you adjust for longevity, when they're doing these studies, they're not adjusting for infant mortality. So when a 1-year-old unfortunately, you know, gets sick and dies during a bad winter or some kind of dysentery, that pulls the average way down. They go, we'll see, in 1900 people only lived to be 49 years old. Well, that's not true. If you live to be 10 or, you know, older, if you got past the infant and toddler stage into a young child, the odds of you living as long as we do today were the same, if not longer. So there's actually been research out of Britain that says people in the 1800s in Britain had a longer lifespan than we do today. Probably not the people working in the coal mine or the Mad Hatters, but I'm just saying on average, you know. So this is evidence of toxins in our environment changing each generation, okay? And it needs to stop. Again, the girls with scoliosis get their period 4 months earlier than average because they have more estrogen in their body and it steals their vitamins out of their body. And then when their bones are growing, they're not growing correctly. Because remember, if you lose these vitamins, it changes the shape of the tissue. And what is scoliosis? A change in shape. So we had that one slide that said if you don't have enough B9 in your body, it can change the shape of things that are growing. Things can grow like a wedge when they should be parallel. And that's kind of what scoliosis is. A lot of times it's these vertebrae that are developed that aren't the right shape, and so then the body tries to make it square. Yeah?
Does the scoliosis, is it caused during formation in the womb, or is it caused as, say, a teenager has a child at 13 years of age?
That's an excellent question. It's both.
Both?
So sometimes you can be born with what's called a hemivertebra, which means you're supposed to have, when you're a baby, you have 33 segments to your spine, and by the time you're an adult, they fuse and there's 26. Mm-hmm. But sometimes you can have 26 and a half, but you only get the left half. So like your body tries to get, your body's really good about getting back on center, but you're going to have a scoliosis that way. And actually there's a study, it's funny you asked that question, because the next slide, they took mice again, and they took out the folate from their diet of the mothers, and when the babies were born, they were born with crooked tails and extra bones in their tail. There you have it. Take away the vitamins, and you can't produce the type of physical shape that you're supposed to. You can't get a decent tail. No. So it bends the tail because, see, there's an extra bone in that tail that makes it make a like 90-degree curve. Yeah, and that happens in people. I mean, we all know people. Not everybody's had X-rays of their spine, but this is really common. This is common enough to be, like I said, in chiropractic school, they call it a normal variant.
They used to screen, I don't know if they do now, but when I did public health nursing, they used to screen for scoliosis in the junior high physicals.
So it's good to screen for it, and what will happen is if you're not born with it and you're born with all the normal amounts of bone, but let's say that as your bones are growing, one side starts to grow faster than the other, then you end up with a wedge. Or what if the left side of your body is getting more blood flow because the left side of your brain is working better than the right? And because the right brain isn't working as well as the left, there's less blood flow on the right side, and so there's less vitamins going into that leg over here, and that leg doesn't have the vitamins to grow as fast as the leg on the left, because sometimes when kids hit a growth spurt, they're growing fast. And so now you have these really long bones, and they're like this far apart now, and they're stuck that way. So now someone has to walk with a heel lift, or they're going to have scoliosis. So this is this is more conjecture, what I just said, but it's my opinion that that's the reason why. There's just not enough vitamins in one system compared to the other, and they don't grow fast enough. There's no other reason why one bone would grow shorter than the other, guys. I mean, there's a little bit of subtle variation, but it's This issue is also related to Marfan's. This is, remember, the kid with the dent in their chest? Every once in a while you hear a newspaper report about some basketball star who's really, really good, tall and lanky, and playing really hard, and then they collapse on the floor at the end of the game during the finals. They're playing hard, and they died on the court because their aorta burst. And these genes that we're talking about are related to people with weak blood vessels. And if you get the right vitamins back in your body, your blood vessels can strengthen again. But if these kids were screened and given nutrition, this wouldn't develop like it does. This is what happens if it's untreated, Marfan's. And you can see just kind of the bulging of and there's a lot of pressure from the heart, so that tissue gets weak and it can kind of expand and lose its strength. This gene, MTHFR, increases depression by 500%. And that's just one gene, right? So what they're saying is without B vitamins, it's hard to feel happy. It's hard to, it affects us. That's all I'm trying to say. It affects us. It affects our well-being. It affects our ability to sleep. It affects how we view the world, how we see ourselves, how we interact. We run on vitamins, and these are the most important ones. And they're all important, but I don't know. This takes the cake. So this one gene increases depression. It can cause insulin resistance, and it can cause high cholesterol. And who do we know that has these problems? That's just, people in our family are dealing with this. We're dealing with this. So learning about your genes is going to really make a difference. And I'm going to show you how to do that here in a minute. Nitric oxide. Who here has heard about that before? Yeah. Have you ever heard of taking L-arginine for health? So nitric oxide was discovered in the late 80s. Those who discovered it won the Nobel Prize in the 90s because they thought, here we have the end of heart disease, right here. And of course, nothing's that simple, and you should never make statements like that because the second you do, you're wrong. But the genes that I'm talking about, the biochemical problems, interfere with your body's ability to make that stuff. And this means this causes really cold extremities. It causes bad circulation. Not having this molecule makes your blood vessels get really tight, and it can increase blood pressure. So it helps to keep the blood vessels open and relaxed. Again, vitamins. It affects how we age and how our brain works. I'm talking about a molecule right now called homocysteine, and it's not something I expect all of you to know, except that when you don't have enough B vitamins, you have way too much homocysteine. Not enough B vitamins, way too much homocysteine. And that homocysteine is not a good thing to have too much of because it causes insulin resistance, raises your cholesterol, and it gives us a predisposition to having something like Parkinson's or neurological disease, like we were showing in those first few slides. So, and it hurts our memory too. So this is the value in these slides is realizing that a lot of the issues that we are challenged with on a daily basis can be fixed by using natural medicine and vitamins at this level. The exposure to a pesticide that we're probably all familiar with caused cancer in that generation, and it kept showing up 4 generations down the road, okay? But what they didn't tell you is then they gave the moms B9, gave them the toxin, and she didn't pass it on to her kids at all. So that's in the whole video. So, bad news with a silver lining. You just have to, the nutrition from Mother Nature and plants protects us more ways than I'll ever know. It doesn't matter how smart you are, you're never going to know everything. And there's more to what the natural medicine and vitamins help us in ways that we'll just continue to learn. And the more you zoom in, the more effects you'll see. But at a certain point, you don't have to know everything to know this will help you, this will hurt you, do this instead of that.
Isn't vitamin B, it's non-stimulated in our body? It doesn't, if we take vitamin B tablets, it doesn't do anything for it?
Well, B vitamins were named in order of how they were discovered. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Most of them we have to get in our diet. You know, we can make, well, they're all diet-based actually. We don't make B vitamins inside of our body. We have to get those from food. And they're water-soluble, so they go into our body quickly and they leave quickly. They do their thing and then they're out. So that's why they need to be on, that's why we take them on a constant basis to make sure that they're in our, 6 days a week. You make sure you get them. You can take a day off once you've been, doing the right thing for a while. But it's interesting, my mom, I told this to my mom. My mom, we're talking about this a while ago, and she said, well, that's interesting that it was 4 generations of mice, because in the Bible it says the sins of the father last 4 generations. So if you're exposed to something, or you have, you're a horrible alcoholic who kills your liver, cheats on your wife, and beats your kids up, I can guarantee you that your grandkids will be a little messed up because of what you do. Now, if you're lucky, those grandkids, maybe they can stop the cycle. You know what I'm saying? So it's what we do affects future generations. I love that idea, and I'm definitely on board with that. So what I wanted to share with everybody is you can actually test your genes, and it costs $99.
Yeah, my daughter got that for a Christmas gift.
And if you get more than one, the second one is $79.
Oh, okay. For repeat testers.
They told her she was a 60% risk of having Alzheimer's.
Well, so
So that's kind of where her focus went.
Well, I'll tell you that what you want to do is ignore their interpretation of what your genes are. And that's why the FDA is involved with 23andMe. So I don't know if you've been paying attention to the whole thing that's been going on, but 23andMe was founded by a woman with a PhD. She's a bazillionaire. Her husband was like one or two guys who founded Google. So, they're well funded. But they do a test with your saliva for $99. And what they used to do when you logged in is they would tell you what your relative risk is. And I think that's just a garbage thing to look at, and I'll tell you why. Because there is no average in our country anymore. If you listen to the averages, well, we're all going to live horrible lives and be broken and in pain our whole life. But I don't believe that, right? I believe people are going to consistently get better and solve their health problem. But there's just no average to compare us against. Does that make sense?
But does it tell you what you're weak for? And
that comes actually, that's another layer down, and that's what individuals, professionals like I do.
I see.
Okay, so to have a risk of Alzheimer's, what that would mean is they have the ApoE4 gene. Okay, the ApoE4. That's really the only genetic risk factor that's been identified for Alzheimer's. What that means is that a paleo diet would not be the smartest thing for you unless it's really well supervised. It means that you have trouble moving cholesterol around your body. So eating high fat, high animal fat diet, and that population is the one population that's should be careful. So it's good to know that.
This is the same daughter that's got the autistic son. I don't know if there's a link in there.
I'm sure. If I saw the report, we could talk about it. But
So would we go online for this? Or?
yeah, you order it, you go online, you click order now. There's a warning on their website that says the FDA has shut them down from doing that reporting that you're talking about. And I'm not really into their reporting. They're saying you have a 15% chance of XYZ syndrome, you have a 10% chance of high blood pressure.
So we'd order it online and then take it to somebody like you?
Mm-hmm. You order it online, and then they run your test. You get a kit in the mail, you spit in it, you send it off, and about a month later, you get this email that says, hey, your results are ready. And you log in, you can see where your family's from on the map.
That's fun.
That's kind of cool. And then what you do is you get what's called your raw data.
Okay.
What that means is they've tested all your genes, but they haven't interpreted it. They just give you, here's a text file with all these genes listed.
It's the memory.
So that's how you figure this out. You test your genes, and they're always finding, 23andMe tests hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, thousands of genes. They do a lot. The report that we look at still looks at about 300 of them, but it's still a lot, okay? Because if you do this test in a blood test, one blood test for one gene is $150. You get 300 genes for $99.
Did you say there's like a second test?
Yes, so the first step is get that ordered and go through the email process. The next step is get the detailed report. And we have another website you go to. You put your raw data on the desktop of your computer and you upload it onto this page. You pay $20 to PayPal and you get this nice report that's colored like that, and it's like 20 pages long. And each green means you're good to go. It means you have the... Go ahead.
Is that through her organization or
No.
somebody else is?
That's a different organization. So the organization is 23andMe to get started, and then the second one is MTHFRsupport.com, because all the awareness that has come up around these genes, there's been some companies and people who have worked to build, they will interpret that for you. They'll give you the report, they won't interpret it for you, which is good. I don't want people to interpret stuff that they don't understand. Because when you log into 23andMe and you have like, oh my gosh, I got a 60% chance of Parkinson's, it just scares you. And there's enough fear.
Because my mother's a little bit out there.
And there's lots of...
And a lot of pharmaceuticals are behind that.
Well, like that slide I showed in the beginning of Alzheimer's disease going up, there aren't any more extra genes in our gene pool. There's the environment making the genes messed up. So if so this report, we work from this report and we can figure out, what you need to know though is the green means you've got the good version of the gene. It means you don't have a handicap. You don't have a traffic jam moving from that A to B, B to C, C to D. Having a yellow means you have a little bit of traffic jam, and red means you're pretty blocked.
Now, is that on the genome or the epigene, the green and red and yellow?
That's a really good question. That is actually the gene.
Okay. So that's not really affected by our nutrition. Or
Yeah, it
stress
is.
or-
It is. So let me explain. The gene, if you have a red square, it means you got a bad version of a gene. And what a gene does is it's instructions to build something. So the instructions say, okay, build this device over here.
Inferior brain cell.
Right, build an inferior enzyme that's just bent a little bit. And because it's bent, it's a salad shooter that's a little bit, broken from the factory and it doesn't work as well. It'll still chop salad a little bit, but you get all this, it's hard and you got to clean it all the time. It's a big pain in the butt. But what you do with the nutrition then is you allow that salad that the salad shooter is cutting to come in at the right shape to fit that problem. So in other words, the messed up gene means you make a bad copy of a brain cell or an enzyme, and then based on what that enzyme does, you give the nutrition, you jump past the enzyme and just give the final product. So UPS is a good example. They're moving a lot of packages around. When you have these problems, you have nutrition that's not getting to where it needs to go, not getting off the truck where it needs to go. But by looking at this map, we can say, okay, here's a traffic jam, here's a traffic jam, here's a traffic jam, and we're going to bypass that and give this different type of nutrient to get what we need to have happen.
Yeah, my Maps app does that now. It tells me where the traffic jam is.
A lot of these minerals and vitamins are what we use. We talked a lot about, methylfolate. That's what you need to see on a label. Methyl. Methyl.
Instead of folic acid.
Yeah, methyl is what you need to know. That's,
If it just says folate,
it's tricky. You need to read the fine print. Sometimes, it's not like folic acid in any form is a toxin. That's not really right. It's just that as a whole, if you add up how much B9 you get, you want to make sure that you get more of the active B9 than the synthetic. And you don't want to you don't want to take high doses of synthetic. But you can, that's some of the nutrients that we use for these issues involves giving you things from plants that mankind has intelligently taken out, put into a capsule so you can get it in high dose. That's the only reason to take supplements, guys. It's stuff from plants that's hard to get in high dose, that we need in high dose because the world is an imperfect and toxic place. And everybody's needs are a little different. And if you really want to drill down and find the absolute most specific way to treat yourself, do this test. And I'm going to use this example of the woman who had a stroke 30 years ago due to birth control. She has red squares on the parts of her body that remove estrogen. So you give her birth control. Birth control is oftentimes about 100 times stronger ounce per ounce than the estrogen that a woman normally makes. Because that's how birth control works. It pretends that you're pregnant. And when you're pregnant, you have a lot of estrogen in your body. She couldn't remove it. The estrogen level built up. High estrogen causes blood clotting. That's what caused her problem. And if we would have known better and looked at it, so we should approach everything that we do with our health with a little bit of caution, but sometimes the medical route is necessary. I'm not suggesting we live in a world without medicine, but I don't want to live on medicine. Get what you need, get it done, and get back on being healthy. And so this is cool. You guys should do this. I mean, more and more patients are doing it. It's affordable, it's really interesting, and it can solve some of these more complex issues. There's some people who have just severe depression, they can't get out of bed. What they really have is a very, very, very low amount of methylfolate in their body. And they take high doses of folate and it's almost like changes their life overnight. So that's not everybody with depression, but that's certainly a subset of those with depression do respond really, really well to it. Any questions or comments on anything so far?
Would this also apply to family trees in history of addictions?
I think that it would apply absolutely because these pathways that are involved in our biochemistry have a big impact on how we make dopamine and serotonin, and all addiction is based on reward. And when you get a reward, you get a burst of something that your brain craves, which is activation. If you don't activate your brain, it starts to go away, okay? Your muscles are kind of that way. You could not move your arm for 10 weeks and your muscle would start to shrink quite a bit. It would hurt to move it. Your brain will start to break down a lot faster. You have about 6 or 7 days of not moving. Like if you went into zero gravity in a straitjacket and you weren't allowed to touch anything and you're up on the space station, I mean, you would like go crazy. Because literally your brain depends on activation to stay alive. So we crave things that cause adrenaline to be released. I have a phrase in my office and it's proved itself to be true, and that is that everybody is an adrenaline junkie. That doesn't mean that everybody's a fighter pilot or jumps off bridges with parachutes attached, but everybody's an adrenaline junkie. People skip meals, they do things that hurt themselves, they eat food they're allergic to over and over and over again. And each time they do something like that, they get a release of adrenaline. Sometimes they grow up in a family where people are abusive and they're physically abused, and then they, as adults, seek the same situation because they are addicted to the adrenaline and the feeling, and they're just so used to that their body craves it. So addiction comes in different forms. I mean, people who are addicted to something in a pill bottle are no different than people who are addicted to all kinds of other things that just popcorn, or even skipping meals, or being a workaholic, or not being involved in their family and just being totally, I don't know. There's all kinds of stuff that happens to people, and it's all about this adrenaline reward circuit. When you get cut off in traffic or you just get your heart racing, it's a stimulant. And deep down we crave that stimulation of adrenaline. It's how we wake up in the morning, okay? We wake up in the morning by releasing adrenaline and cortisol. If you happen to wake up in the middle of the night and you find your heart beating and your palms are sweaty and you're having an intense night, kind of a nightmare, you're swimming in adrenaline. So anybody who has a nightmare, something's causing them to release adrenaline at the wrong time. So we are just creatures of habit, guys. I like to talk, and I like to hear myself talk, so I have my own adrenaline junkie experience too, right? But we should know that.
Pick the healthy ones.
Well, yeah, right, exactly. Pick your addictions carefully because you're going to be addicted. You just better make sure they're good for you.
So, is it advisable for both, like a husband and wife, to do this before they consider having children?
I think it'd be a really interesting study to do that. Yeah.
And I think what I'm hearing is this is why GMO crops and pesticides in our food
Sure, that's a good read on that. You know, it's not just hurting the person who's eating it, it's messing with our DNA.
But it can't help you if you're trying to overcome that either.
No, it can't help. No, it's going to hurt. And I think a lot of the processed food is also fortified with folic acid. So you get the double, you're like, you know, you see someone with high folic acid in their body, it's like, where is this coming from? Well, it comes from fortified grains. Pain from the grain. It's a consistent theme. So next month we're going to talk about adrenal fatigue. And that's going to be, I think that's going to be a really good talk.
Was that gonna be here?
Yeah. So spread the word. It's going to be awesome. The adrenal fatigue one, that's so important.